Took a piece of 035 stainless steel wire and I straightened it out, and I bent a little V in it just like that with some little small pliers. I got plenty of extra wire. We drew on the lure with a pin to see the way we wanted our wire to go, and my wire matches what we drew on the lure. So I'm going to take the top half of the lure and I'm going to hold the wire in place, and I'm going to lay it down here to where the wire is sandwiched in place, and I'm just going to make sure it's lined up, and then I'm just going to kind of squeeze the lure real good up and down with my hand, smashing the imprint of the wire into the balsa wood. So after you do that, if the camera can see it, you can see the wire has left an indentation that you can follow with your Dremel, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. We've got our tool in the Dremel. I'm going to use this little pointed high-speed cutter. It'll cut the wood easy. You can use a little ball type cutters. Any of these little high-speed engraving tools you can use. This little pointed one works good to trace that pattern from the wire. So I'm just going to trace a little pattern where the wire will have somewhere to sit, so our lure, our two halves of our lure will fit together really, really good. Alright, basically all I did was make a little groove where the indentation was, so the wire is going to sit a little flatter. I'm going to take my piece of wire, I'm going to lay it back on the bait like I had it, and I'm going to take a little dab of super glue on the bottom half of the plug, and I'm going to put a little dab just at the tip of the wire just to hold the wire in place for now, and at the rear of the wire. Just a little dab is all you need, front and rear, just hold it in place. Hold it there for a few minutes till it's glued and stays in place. And then after we get it to where it'll stay in place real good, we'll fit our two halves together. So I decided I wanted to add a little weight transfer or a little more ballast towards the rear. So I took the little high-speed round cutter that we use for the belly plug, and I knew where my wire was going to be, so I routed out a little slot on the same spot on both halves of the lure. So it matches, and we're going to drop two BBs in that. They'll roll back and forth. We already have our belly weight fitted. We know it works. We have our wire tacked to that one. So we're going to make sure everything fits together just how we want it before we glue anything. You can hear them two little BBs moving back and forth. They're not a loud rattle or nothing, but they'll give a little sound. Everything fits together nice. It's how we want it. The wire's coming out right at the back where it should. At the front, the wire's coming out right at the nose where it should. The seam will be invisible. So everything fits inside perfect. We're going to lay it down. We're going to take a little bit of super glue for now, and we're going to tack them together. We're going to go all the way along the edge, and you want your BBs to move, so don't get no super glue on them. I'm just going to take and run a little bit of super glue all the way around the plug. And this is to seal the seam good. And you want your belly weight to stay in place. You can put a drop on it and it'll stay in place. And your wire will stay in place. It gets a drop. So I've got a little super glue all the way around it. And I'm going to fit them back together. And I'm going to make sure the halves are lined up. And I'm going to smash it and squeeze it all the way around to make sure the halves stay right where I want them. My belly weight, the thing is just right. And this super glue dries real quick. So this is the main step in getting your bait to be seamless. And you see the seam just because there's super glue on it. But your wire is coming out right where it should. Your seams are all going to be hidden. So we're going to smash it together a little while, and then we're going to start sanding. So our lure's had time to dry. I laid it up under this piece of granite. Everything's good and dry. The wire's got plenty of wire sticking out on both ends. We're not worried about that right now because we're going to use that later to put our props on. The wire won't be able to twist inside there because we made that little groove. So we'll just take some sandpaper. And we're just keeping the lure flat on the seam right now. We hadn't begun to shape the lure yet. So we just sand our seam a little bit. Get both sides where they're good and even. Just go around it. Some sandpaper. Sand your seams. Just keeping it flat for now. And just, sand a little bit around your hook eye right there. And just make sure, your seam. If you have any gaps, you can go back and drop a little super glue in the gap and squeeze it together a little more. There's a little small gap right here at the back, and I want to fill that in with a little Zap-A-Gap or super glue. And it'll become one with the wood. So now I'm just going to hold it for a minute, and when that dries, I'll sand off the excess. Super glue's had plenty of time to dry. You saw the process of putting everything in there. I've got a shaping machine that I'll shape lures that are not a one-piece wire or a two-piece lure. It's a machine that'll contour this for you, but these I do by hand. I take this little, it's like a carpet knife, it's just a little hook, and I'll start just rounding over his edge just a little bit, just taking off just enough to where I don't have to sand quite as much. And it's real easy just to shave off, just to round over that edge just a little bit. You ain't got to get crazy with it. You just want to take off a little bit to save a little time sanding. And be careful when you're cutting with the grain because you can make a big gouge in it. But it's real easy to just take this little hook and just go ahead and save you a little time by shaving off. You can see where I've just shaved off the corners a little bit. And it's pretty easy to cut this balsa wood. You just take your little knife and just kind of run it along the edge and just shave off a little piece. Down here at the belly you can shave off a little bit because it's going to be rounded right there a little bit. Then right here you got to be careful, just shave off a smidgen on all the sides. Right at the tail, we're going to taper that down a little bit so you can take a chunk off of there. And that's pretty much all that you're going to do as far as hand carving. It's real simple, it's real soft. You can, don't get carried away and take off too much. You can take it away, but you can't put it back. So after I go around it that quick, I go back to just my 100 grit sandpaper, or I think this is 120, and I'll start just rounding over everything I just did by hand. Just making everything uniform, side to side. We're still going to have a flat bait, but you got to round it over some. So I'll sand the seam more while I'm doing this, and you sand just all around your wire, leaving your wire there, rounding off everything that you've done. When you get to the nose and the tail, you can take your paper and just kind of taper it down to a point so that your propeller cup will fit on there good. And you can see how easy it is just to start sanding that round shape into it. So I'll go over the whole lure doing this and show it to you after that. That's after 3 minutes of sanding, after I've done, carved off as much as I could. One of the tips is I highly recommend you get that little hook blade. It's much easier to be precise and take off small amounts without gouging the lure. It gets in the tight spots real good where you can just take off a little bit. So after you sand it and you see a bigger spot that needs to come down, you can go back and you can shave just a little more, say around his nose or whatever. Sand it again till you get it all uniform, looks even on both sides. Once you do that, you can see now the seam is just two colors, but it's you can't feel it at all. So once we seal the lure and start painting and stuff, you won't see it, not one bit. I sanded my lure. I trimmed a little bit of the wire off the rear just so I'll be able to dip it in my sealer. And on the front end I made a little hook so I'll be able to hang it up. But our lure's been sanded, everything's good to go. And our BBs still move back and forth. This is a product called propionate. It's like this little liquid. It's these little plastic beads that are clear, and you dissolve it in acetone. And a lot of guys that make handmade lures use this stuff. It's called propionate. You can buy it online. There's a guy on eBay that sells it, and I use it, or I use an enamel paint that you saw in my other video. This makes a really hard, good sealer. It seals it good. You dip it a couple times, let it kind of drip dry, and I'm going to hang it over here and let it dry. And it doesn't take long to dry. It probably takes, 8 or 10 minutes to dry. You want a good thick coat, but it's pretty clear. Once it dries, it'll be a little hazy, but I mean, it's okay because we're going to paint over it anyway, or we're going to wrap the bait anyway. So I'm going to hang that up, let it dry, and then we'll go to our next step.